But welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. I'm going to be doing a very short introduction before I pass it off to our four wonderful speakers that we have joining us today. I want to do a very quick thank you to our sponsors for making this event possible, for allowing us to have the space and time to show up together. My name is Taylor. I'm joining from the Academy of Sustainable Innovation. We are the hosts of this event today, but we are certainly not the stars of this. I'll be introducing the speakers in just a moment. But before we get started, I wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. That includes talking through the flow of this event, as it is a little bit different than a typical panel discussion. So I'll just talk for a couple of more minutes about housekeeping things, and then I'll really just pass it over to our speakers for the next rest of our hour together before we close out. So without further ado, I want to just take a moment to set some expectations for today. Like I said, this is not a typical panel discussion where we have a moderator and speakers and set questions. So we've really intentionally designed this to be an emergent conversation amongst the four speakers that we've invited here today. So this is our attempt also to sort of model how we can do things differently, even in the context of, this Zoom space. Can we hold different conversations? Can we change the way that we do that? So with respect to the way that we've really intentionally designed this, we won't be taking questions today. And so with that, we ask that everyone stays on mute. As I said, you're welcome to be on camera if you wish. We will be spotlighting participants, though, for the remainder of the event. If you can stay muted, we've been really intentional, like I said, with coming up with some themes and topics that the speakers would like to talk about today. But like I said, it's really emergent and a chance for, free-flowing conversation. The idea is to emulate, like, what if we were sort of sitting around a fire having this conversation together? What could that look like? And how can we try and do that in this virtual space? So with that spirit in mind, please hold that with you as we continue today. And please feel welcome to engage in the chat, but I also hope that we can be really present and really attentive to listening to what the speakers have to share today. So with that, I would love to just take a moment to settle in by sharing some context of the space that I come from today, the land that I come from. I know and I'm sure that all of us are coming from different contexts, different land as we join virtually today. But I am calling in from Treaty 19 territory. This is the land that's situated on the Credit River watershed. I'm so grateful to call this place home, but I'm also continuing to learn and be in relationship with the land. So this has, I've only lived here for a few years, but it's a continual practice of learning and listening, deep listening. And it's a journey that's never finished. It's a continuous relationship. And so I open this space sort of with that invitation to you all to continue or begin to start your journey on having a relationship with the land where you live. And also, it's sort of an invitation as we think about this session today. How can we hold space to really be present in this session and to continue to learn and listen from each other? And then from there, how can we take action on the things that we learned from today? How can we hope that it doesn't just stop there with learning? So this is also the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat people. And so I also honor those people who are the original stewards of this land and continue to be stewards of this land as I consider where I'm situated today. And so I want to use that as a place to move us into inviting our speakers today. We've invited Jordyn Burnouf, Aubrey-Anne Laliberte-Pewapisconias, and Freddie Huppé Campbell and Danii Kehler to join us today in this conversation. They're going to be, like I said, having an emergent conversation, but talking about themes around breaking barriers and decolonizing leadership, matriarchal and youth leadership, and other topics that come up during their conversation. I am so so grateful and honored to invite these four speakers to chat with each other today and for us to be able to listen. Yeah, I'm so heartwarmed to be able to share this space with them today. So these four speakers are really rooted in community, doing the work of climate action and community building at local, national, and international levels. They're working to shift energy systems, uplift Indigenous youth, create and tell stories about past and futures, and are making extraordinary changes and bringing Indigenous perspectives and decision making across the country. So with that, and without further ado, I will end my speaking now, and I'm going to pass it over to Danii to introduce yourself and to share a bit about your work and your context.
Yeah, so Tansei Kape Wawasak Nisagasin Nianahe Square Tante Kawakatusa. So hello and how are you? My name is Comes Lightning and my English name is Danii Kehler. I'm a Plains Cree woman from Kawakatus First Nations on Treaty 4 territory in the country known as Canada. I wear many hats, I am many things. First and foremost, I'm an Indigenous artist. I'm a mixed media artist, so I'm a painter, but I do traditional beadwork on top of my paintings to give it a three-dimensional feel and to give my paintings spirit. So I don't really see any of the works like that I do and out there, but that's what I do, and I do it to expose the true beauty and meaning of Indigenous people in our culture. I am also, what else am I? I am on Saskatoon's Environmental Advisory Committee. I am I am the auntie of Antarctica. So I'm an ambassador for the Antarctic. I was the first First Nations person from Canada to be a participant of the 2041 Foundation, where I went down to Antarctica, learned about climate science, leadership skills, and worked with people from all over the world to learn about the peace treaty and to implement sustainable solutions to help preserve Antarctica, which led me to become a founding member of Antarctic Rights, which is a nonprofit organization where we are writing a declaration to propose to the United Nations about getting Antarctica her own personhood rights and making her a legal living entity. So it works alongside the peace treaty. And my daytime job, these are all my passion projects. I work for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner in Saskatchewan, and I just signed my new contract, and I'm really excited about the work that I'm going to be doing. So I will be helping write reports about UNDRIP and implementing them, implementing UNDRIP within the treaty systems here in Saskatchewan, and getting an environmental lens on our duty to uphold our inherent rights to look after the land. And I'm really excited to get started on this. It's super exciting. I've been dreaming about it for a while. But yeah, all of the work that I do kind of started with dreams. So like I'm a very big believer in dreams. When I started this work, I always said like I was just an artist, and everybody tells me you weren't just an artist, but like I literally was. I didn't know anything. And one of the things that opened a door for me was 7Gen, where I met my lovely climate bestie, Jordyn Burnouf. We worked together for the past 5 years, and we helped establish 7Gen into a nonprofit organization and did a whole bunch of youth empowerment work, educational work, did summits, and it's a very beautiful thing, and it's what really led me onto my path into sustainability. It led me into becoming a council member, to managing the program itself, to establishing it into a nonprofit. And then that also led me to the Antarctic work, so where I'm working with scientists and lawyers from across the world to try and save Antarctica, because she is really important. And it all started with a dream. So like I can't express how important dreams are. Because yeah, my paintings that I create are usually dreams that I've had, and they come into fruition. And it's really crazy when that happens. Like the last one that I had, I was in Antarctica and I dreamt about the Arctic. and having a bunch of Indigenous youth up in the Arctic. And I couldn't get that dream out of my head. And lo and behold, like I convinced the 7 Gen Council to bring the 7 Gen 3.0 summit up to the Arctic in Iqaluit, Nunavut, which was held about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago now. Yeah, so very exciting. So I can't express how important dreams are. And I would love to hear of more dreams, such as Freddie's dreams. What kind of dreams do you have, Freddie?
Oh, Marcy, Danii. Tansei kia wow, Freddie Huppé Campbell, de Shanika Sean, Kootenay Chi Niamaka, ni Mama Leanne Huppé, Shanika Sean, ni Papa Peter Campbell, Shanika Sean, Kakiawama Parenti. Hello, folks. My name is Freddie Huppé Campbell. I'm a two-spirit Michif human, pronouns she, they. My Michif side is my matriarchal side, my mother, Leanne Huppé, and I also hold ancestry from Scottish, Irish, and British roots on my paternal side. So grateful to be here with all my relations today, human and non-human kin. Even more honored to be speaking on this panel with these deadly matriarchs. I'm so grateful. These are all women who I call friends and kin, and we've gotten to know each other through so many different events and spaces and other parts of traveling in other parts of the world, visiting our kin. So it's pretty great to be in this space and be grounding one another in this space. I also am an artist. I'm a beadworker, wood carver. I am the director of the Energy and Climate Team at Indigenous Clean Energy, which encompasses our national and our global programming. Also family member, a friend. You know, it's always interesting, Danii, I heard you say, who am I? It's always interesting explaining who we are. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming to the space today. From the Kootenay region, where I was raised, and very grateful to be here. Yesterday, I was telling these folks, went up into the mountains and found a 785-year-old ancestor. And it was amazing. In a very sacred forest. And it was so nice to be spending that time there on the land. And when I think about futures and dreaming, I too come to this space with a lot of hope and strength that our kin and being connected hold. And the work that we do at Indigenous Clean Energy on a global level also comes out of dreams. We had a vision to provide decolonial solidarity and support to our kin in other parts of the world, and really create more conversation and relationships around the importance of this energy transition not being approached in the same way, in an extractive and an exploitive way for resources and labor to our kin in other parts of the world. And so we're doing a lot of work building relationships and creating more pathways for nation to nation solidarity, and trying to understand now that Indigenous nations are the second largest asset owners of renewable energy in our country, how do we use that both physical and metaphorical power to do things differently and create different systems. I'm going to stop there and I'll throw it over to Jordyn. But Kitchi, merci for having me.
Tanse, so amazing to hear Danii and Freddie's stories. And Aubrey-Anne, looking forward to hearing your share as well. Like they mentioned, it's a tight-knit little community, I think, that we've been able to build. And I guess for myself, Tanse, Jordyn Burnouf Nisikasun, Sagatuwakote. I'm sitting here looking out at, some little squirrels running by, a little blue jay flying by, some little birds cruising by. So I'm very blessed to come from a community that's situated next to some big water and a river system that flows all the way from the eastern part of Canada right through across this this entire landmass. And I think that's one of the cool things about my community is the water has connected us with many, many people. And so Freddie, thank you for acknowledging our ancestors, the trees, and the many non-human kin that are also here with us today. I think that's important to, like, you know, when we talk about ceremony and spirituality as Indigenous people, like when you name that, you bring them, you welcome them into the space as well. So I think it's really great to open that way, to make a seat and to make a space for our non-human kin. So I'm from the community of Isla Cross. I mentioned Sagatuaq. Sagatuaq, it means where the rivers open up. Again, a really interesting part of the world. Home to one of the second oldest communities in this province, and one of the second oldest residential schools in this country. It predates what we now know as Canada. It predates the province of Saskatchewan. And I guess that's kind of, I think, where my work in this industry began. It began ages, I don't know what that is. I'm not pushing the button. I'm like, yeah, I started my journey 250 years ago. I'm actually an elf that's like 300 years old. Just kidding. Yeah, I say weird things like this, but that's part of the that's part of the story. Anyway, I think my story starts all of those generations ago, right back to when our Kukums had their hearts broken when their children were taken from their homes and from their lands. And I always like to mention that, because I think as people from this nation, from what we now know as Canada, I think especially folks that work in the energy, natural resource sector, environmental sector, I think it's very important to attribute everything that we have in terms of innovation, in terms of you know, this society that we're very proud of globally. I think we must not only look at the harm, but look at the strength of the survivors that actually you know, they're truly the reason that we're at where we're at today. So I always like to mention that. A part of my job is actually working with this survivors circle from my community and seeking justice at national and international levels for recognition of this school, because this school is second oldest in the country and it's never been recognized under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and whatnot. And it all has to do with some funky little lines some old Muniao guy drew up 200 years ago. And it is such a simple solution to fix and honor survivors, but it becomes a very political issue when it comes time to actually act and, you know, help find restitution for folks in that space. So I just wanted to, one, introduce my community, and two, I think the biggest part of my story is the ancestors that came before me and sacrificed so much for us to be here. Part of my work, I'll start with the day-to-day. I work with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. So I'm a Nihiao woman, I'm a Cree woman, and I'm also a Métis woman. And I come from the community of Isla Cross, which is a historic Métis community, one of the first trading posts in this part of the world. And, you know, so home to one of the original economies, which was the fur trade. And now in our backyard, we have some of the richest deposits of uranium in the world. So a part of one of the most innovative economies now in this day and age. I'm a member of Black Lake First Nation, and yeah, so I work with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan as the Sustainable Energy and Sovereignty Specialist, which essentially I am working internally to try and find ways that all of the different ministries, all of the different departments within the Métis Nation are kind of working together to create this ecosystem where we see energy not just as like this tiny little compartment of renewable energy work, but that it flows into everything and everything flows into it. And I think that's the cool part of the energy system is the real true impact is not only, you know, on our energy bills or on like the economic part of things, but it's actually like it's an entire socioeconomic system. So that's really exciting work. I was former co-chair of 7Gen with Danii, and so very much so worked a lot with Freddie and Aubrey-Anne as well. I'm a board member of Indigenous Clean Energy. I'm also a board member of the Canadian Climate Institute. Really interesting groups, I think, in the sense of like community-based work. And then you look at something like CCI, where it's like policy, political influence kind of work. So I like to challenge my brain and challenge my imposter syndrome to really like go further. And then I'm also a part of Wahilatus, which is an Indigenous council that advises Canada on ways to better fund and create like long-term sustainable pathways for communities to access energy resources, whether it's in the form of like human resource to support that work, or actual dollars, sunias, as we say in Cree, to make things happen on the ground. And it's been an interesting journey working with Indigenous Services Canada. It was created by Natural Resources Canada. Environment and Climate Change Canada is also a big part of that. CERNAC, kind of all of these different ministries that intersect on the energy conversation. And it's essentially like the fact, and maybe Freddie will talk about this a little bit later, but the fact, one of the coolest facts about Indigenous energy is that we are the leaders in terms of like small to large scale energy projects. And so it's like, it's proven, we know the success is there, that Indigenous led energy projects are the solution to fighting the climate crisis. And so how do we make that happen faster with less barriers? And that's essentially our job at Wahilatus. So there'll be a report coming out soon, so keep your eyes peeled. I'll share it on my socials, but I'm going to move it over to Aubrey-Anne.
Awesome. I am very, very grateful to be able to share space on this panel with my fellow panelists. I promise I haven't been being rude this whole time. I have a concussion, which my fellow panelists know, so I'm not really looking directly at the screen today, just to avoid getting like a headache later on, because I work with Freddie and I need to do my job later, so it's a good time. But my name is Aubrey-Anne Laliberte-Pewapisconias. I am a Nehiasqueo from Canoe Lake Cree First Nation and Little Pine First Nation. My family in Little Pine is the Pewapisconias family. My mushum was Gerald Pewapisconias. And he really gave me the opportunity to kind of grow up, and without saying anything or necessarily talking about climate action or about talking about renewable energy or anything like that, he was able to, really be an instrumental part in raising me when it came to knowing our relation to the land around us. And he did that in the way that he walked in the world, and he did that in the way that he cared for the animals around him. And I always talk about my mushum when I come and speak on events like this, because even though he's passed on, like, he's probably the biggest reason that I stay in this space. And that's because the way that he lived and the way that he, walked in the world as like a horseman is, he did everything that he could to take care of animals that he saw as his family, that he saw as his kin, that he saw as, he was so mad at what was happening in the world because it was affecting the climate, it was affecting the grass, it was affecting, our people and how they could operate and how he could care for our other living kin. And I think that that's like an interesting way that I got to watch him kind of operate, and got to see that this is like a big part of, like, this is who we are as a people, as like Indigenous people, because for us, it's not something that you get to you always use all these technical terms on. It's not something that you're going and saying that it's necessarily verified by scientists, or that it's something that you go to these international meetings and discuss. It's something that's just inherently part of everything that we do in our practices and who we are as a people. And so from there, if you look at it in that sense, you look at it as all Indigenous people without even knowing it are climate leaders. They're peoples who are, taking action in this space. And especially when we reclaim our teachings and we reclaim our language, we get to see a lot of that. And so I've had the opportunity, I work at Indigenous Clean Energy as the Imagination Program Manager, and in my role, I get to work with Indigenous youth across the country to build small-scale clean energy projects in their nations as kind of an introductory way of introducing their communities to clean energy. We always talk about it as like, even though that we call them small-scale projects, they're by no means small in the impact that they create in their communities. And that's because, a lot of communities, it's not always like it's something right off the bat that we can do in renewable energy to invest millions and millions of dollars into a major scale clean energy project. It's oftentimes something that we bring into communities to show that youth can be leaders in this space and that they are leaders in this space. And B, that it's something to start that process, start the capacity building. And a lot of them come with other aspects. So they come with energy efficiency projects, which means that we're having healthy energy living in our homes, and that it's not just about the renewable energy, it's making sure that our homes are healthy. And that takes us back to our teachings too of, taking care of where we go back to where our family stays. We also see projects that are net zero greenhouses taking place in communities. So it's connecting us to energy, but it's also connecting us to food sovereignty and ensuring that our youth are having the opportunity to build or to grow their medicines in these greenhouses too. And so that they're taught proper harvesting techniques so that we're not actually harming those plants so that they don't grow back. So it's really quite beautiful in a lot of the ways that the youth are leading in this space already. And I'm very fortunate to get to see that. And, in my work, it's taken me to a few different places. Like I've had the opportunity to be in Egypt at COP27 with actually all the panelists that are here. And then also I've had the opportunity to go to India and negotiate climate policy at the G20 Youth Summit. And then all those spaces, what I kept thinking about was that I'm sure my parents, when they were just young little Cree parents, they didn't expect to see, their daughter doing that work. And what I kept thinking is, they didn't even know that those spaces existed, but they're the only reason that I have the teachings that I have. And because of that, I'm thankful to have been in those spaces and I'm grateful for that work. But the main thing for me now is going back to community and going back to the folks that I have around me and showing the youth that those spaces exist, because we can't ask to be at a table that we don't know is there. And so that's often, a barrier that we see. And so it's been really important for me to get to go back and do that stuff. Sometimes when I'm coming to speak at events like this. I actually just last week got to go to a high tanning camp in Minnestickwin. It was Goniasik camp. And it was a really amazing event in the sense that, I really got to see, me and my boss kept making jokes that we're berry pickers because sometimes it was a bit messy for us, but we really got to see, the process of how to this day we take our teachings from years and years and years ago, that we can see the love in those teachings from our ancestors. Because we were using every part of the animal at that hide camp. We were using the brains to soften. We were using the bones to scrape. We were using the fur to keep things packaged and warm. We were utilizing the waters around us from the lake beside us in Minnestickwin to soak them in. We were really using the world around us to do that hide tanning process. And so when I come to spaces like this, I always remember that there's people like Kevin and there's people like Darla who are bringing these teachings within those camps to these different spaces so that we can hold space like this, so that, we get to come and speak on panels like this or speak in fireside chats like this. Because we know all of us have a different role and we're still taking on those roles in communities, and they're keeping these sacred home fires alive and with our teachings, and allowing us to, learn and get to share that. And it's a really beautiful thing. And so it's just so many ways that we're leaders in climate action, and it's hard to just pinpoint it. And it's a beautiful thing to be immersed in. And so I'm very thankful for that. And yeah, it's really beautiful. And I know that that exists like all around the world. And that's always why I like joking around with Freddie, because I'm always like talking to her because she's all over the place too. Um, and so like, I don't know, Freddie, like for you, I like looking at just kind of like how, for me, I was even like how I was just saying, I always want to go back to community. How for you, like going international, has it meant to like you like mobilize youth and share our programming that we do to other folks and to our other kin, and also to honor that their teachings are sometimes different than ours?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Aubrey-Anne. I feel so honored to be able to do this type of work and really build good relationships and maintain those relationships with our kin in other parts of the world. We've co-created a program in so-called Australia, and we're integrating kin from Aotearoa, or so-called New Zealand. We'll be delivering the first ever Indigenous clean energy program next year in Colombia in Spanish, and simultaneously working with some folks in Ecuador to build some curriculum around Indigenous ways of energy sovereignty there. And yeah, it's contextually, it's so different, and yet there are so many alignments with stories of Indigenous nations across the world. And I think that that's something that's really beautiful. I find personally in a lot of the spaces that I get to be in, it feels like I've been there. And through my teachings, it said that that's like blood memory, and that our ancestors have maybe walked and been connected. And so I find that really, really beautiful. Getting to participate in ceremony with other kin and exchange our knowledge and our ways of being is something that I hold so dear. And I've taken so many beautiful teachings into my daily practices within ceremony and just, yeah, within everything. So I think it's pretty special to be able to rebuild those kinship ties. I think even with our kin on Turtle Island, due to colonial borders, there's a lot of rebuilding that we do daily. And I guess something that I am curious about too, I know we left this panel to be more of a discussion, which I already love because I think it's inherently decolonial. But I'm curious, I think in the work that, Jordyn, Danii, Aubrey-Anne, and I do, and many other of our kin, we come as we are into these spaces. And we're already breaking down what that means. I've heard all of these amazing women speak to who they are and how that comes into the work. And so I'm kind of curious, like Jordyn, Danii, and Aubrey-Anne too, if you have thoughts around like how you break down those systems when you're in the system. And like that might just be also very inherent to you naturally. But if you could maybe share, if you'd be willing to share some of that with folks listening, like, yeah, how do you see that almost maybe your way of being is also breaking and creating new systems?
I see Danii like pulling down her sleeves, which means she actually wants to pull up her sleeves and just go off. So I'm going to let you do the systems talk first, Danii.
Jordyn knows me too well. I just like had like Freddie just made me like think of like some things that just like came off of my mind right away. And like Jordyn like is brilliant. She can attest to like everything too. But for me, the being in the systems and all of that jazz, that's kind of the reason why, like Jordyn can attest to this, like why 7 Gen was so important for us and like why we wanted to keep that momentum. Like we all went to an energy summit back in 2019, and like that was it. That was supposed to be it. And then Jordyn cornered the executive director and said that the movement couldn't die. So I hear, like, so the story goes. But it was true, the movement couldn't die. Like we seen a place for us. We've seen ourselves in these spaces that we could actually uphold these spaces and that we have somewhere to be, even though we're not accredited in the Western world, like, you know, science or engineer or doctor or anything like that. But like in our own home communities, we do have experts in those fields. You know, they might not be accredited in the Western field, but they do have extensive, like 1,000-year-old ancestral knowledge about this. And it all comes from Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of being, from our connection with the land to creator to community. And that's why 7th Gen was so important to me. It's like it opened up a whole door of opportunities. It unlocked the potential in my mind about how I can take up space in these spaces and how I am relevant in these spaces and just as important as everybody else. Because like I was just an artist, I didn't know anything, and like, you know, I was lost in the sauce. Like I was like, I don't belong here, and the matter of the fact is I did belong there. And not being so part of the system was like my superpower, basically. I remember before going on like a big talk, and I was an expert on traditional ecological knowledge, and I was flipping out because I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what the acronym was or like anything, and I was just like, I don't know what this is. I can't speak on this. And then my boss was just like, calm down, Danii. It's just your knowledge of the land. It's all the teachings that your cookum, like your grandmother gave you, your connection to land, you know, your medicines, how you harvest them, like why that is so important. And I was like, oh, okay, I got this, no sweat. And like, you know, it just took like the pressure off of me. And so like just thinking outside the box, like thinking innovatively. But there's also like, as much being the First Nations person to go to be part of 2041 Foundation Antarctica, breaking down that barrier, right? Like that was super cool. That was like me with my fists in the air, and like, I'm doing this for my people, leaving my footprints so the youth can follow them and go further than I could ever have imagined. Like that's exactly what it's about for me. And as cool as that was, there's also hardships to breaking barriers too. You know what I mean? Like when we're talking about our mental health and the energy of ourselves, we have to like look within and make sure that we're okay. And there's, in my experience, there really wasn't policies and stuff that were put in place for my protection when it goes to traveling internationally. Like Egypt was a very scary and traumatic place for myself, and I had to break down these barriers um, for the youth, because you know the next delegation that we took and next international trip that we took, there was policies put in place to ensure that there is safety procedures and like emergency backup plans and all of this stuff that wasn't previously thought about. And you know, as much as breaking barriers is super important, it's also really heavy work and it can take a lot out of you. And so it's just to be very mindful about the balance that you need to do, because as cool as it is, as much as it's needed, it also has like, it can also have a very negative effect on you. So it's just like stress that, you know, finding your balance and making sure that you're okay and you're being vocal about it and you leave nobody behind and you're always there for each other. Like, I think that's super important. I don't know if I'm going off topic, but like, that's just like how the being in the system made me feel, you know, and, breaking barriers and all that stuff. But that's what it completely popped off my mind when Jordyn was saying I was pulling up my sleeves. So I'll let her go now. She can go off.
Okay, thanks, Danii. Again, as always, hard to follow, but I'll try. When I think of this, and thanks for the question, Freddie, because I think this is like one of the most important kind of topics of our time, and it is the crux of the energy issue is how are we how are we truly changing the way the systems work? Because I think it's like anything, you know, it's like there are not just why does this keep happening? There are not just like bad people, but it's like the systems that confine us and people almost feel, I don't know if people have seen what the heck is it called, but like The Dude Abides, The Big Lebowski. The Dude Abides, you know, it's like we are more okay with following the rules than challenging the status quo to see change be affected. And that is like the role of every single person in any system, right? Is like you have the people on the ground, on the front lines, that are the activists. And sometimes people get very uncomfortable with folks like in that space, because it's like, what am I doing? Am I doing enough? Like, you know, you start to internalize that and you start to take things personal. And it's like, those are the people that are pushing the bar, pushing the standards, you know? And then you have people that are doing all of the little tedious pieces, like the small incremental changes on the inside. And then you have like the big picture thinkers, like the ones who can, you know, work on toward like this concept of like globalization and see how that can help. But then you have like the local people on the ground who understand that concepts like globalization don't work for everybody, and that we have to decentralize systems, and that we have to like change the way that, you know, the trajectory of our societies have gone. And I think you can kind of pull that concept as a whole and like you parachute that into like any part of the world. And ultimately it goes down to these mechanisms of colonization, right? Where oppression and control kind of feed the system. And so when we can identify what those mechanisms of control are, then, you know, you start to realize that, oh, it's not me personally. And like, imagine I'm like, here's a funny example, and I will name a person because he said it, and so he opened the floor to be quoted on this, and I thought it was really interesting. I was like, good for you, way to be okay with being wrong, and way to like put your utility in the line of fire for something that was so historically like unjust and just purely like inhumane. So the CEO of Hydro-Quebec a few weeks ago at the Canadian Climate Institute event, I don't know if folks on the call were there, but I thought it was so interesting. Like I was like, you know, just like locked in on this conversation. But he had just essentially identified like, look, this is how projects are done. And he was super like, he's just like a real like frank, like just blunt kind of person. And doesn't come with a French accent where it like can seem so much sweeter, but it's just like, here's how we used to do business. You know, we would, you know, look at this like major energy, this hydro project. We take that, we put it in a community. We don't consult, we don't talk to people. We just impose this in communities. Maybe we give out a few jobs here and there, but ultimately like there's no ownership. There's no like access for communities to like even be a part of, you know, any sort of planning for this project on let alone on, you know, the planning and development side, but the actual like operations of that asset, right? And that's how projects have been done historically. And we see that, especially when you think of things like hydro that are, you know, arguably clean, but then you look at the true impact in community, and you look at communities like Gull Bay, and our friend AJ Esquega is from Gull Bay First Nation, and big hydro literally washed out almost like big parts of their community, including where their ancestors were buried. And there were people literally being washed out and floating down the river, like those ancestors that were buried in those cemeteries. And, you know, when it comes to the spiritual integrity and like the cultural connection to who we are, like, you know, everything about that, if not, you know, in real form, but even like theoretically, that was all pulled apart, right? That's like all torn apart by doing projects and a system operating in that way, and a business having more rights than the water, more rights than, you know, the ancestors that have passed on. And so this guy like identified it and said, we can't do business like that anymore, you know. And this goes hand in hand with what like a lot of my friends on this call have said. Like times are changing, and I think it's a matter of like also legislating certain policies that people see, well, it's illegal to do things in that way. But I think there's like also collective agency for us to see that like it's just wrong. It's just not humane. And it's just, it's not a good look. Like a part of our world is social media. A part of our world are these little boxes that, people and organizations show up in. And, everything is under a microscope now. And, there's often things like all of those different players that play a role. There are things that we don't understand when it comes to an energy transition that are behind closed doors. But then there are things on the ground that people are not necessarily listening to. And that is where I think the crux of the issue happens. And we need to like pay more attention to the braiding of those knowledges. And I think, when this Hydro-Quebec leader kind of identified that, I think it's interesting to see like we need to include Indigenous people in projects and not just in the way that we've done it before. But like Danii talked about her work on UNDRIP, right? Like consultation was a bare minimum, and it's always been the bare minimum. And a lot of development didn't even consider that because they didn't have to, because communities were not organized and we were not prepared to fight those battles. And now it's at a place where, we are, and you have to consult at the bare minimum. And now we're moving to a place of consent where, over time and different variables and factors come into play. And especially with the change in climate and like adaptation issues arising, like consent is even more important. And the more that people start to pay attention to that and build that into the systems, and by building that into the systems, essentially you're breaking down all of those oppressive mechanisms and not actually building anything up. You're just like taking away all of those like little like facades of power or control, like the ghost ship of meritocracy. A friend of mine always says, it's like, there are these levels of power that we believe in. And once you start to move that belief around and look at like, okay, things like consent and inherent right of Indigenous people, and you see the true impact, like Aubrey was talking about, all of those pieces of the environment coming into like actually changing the way that we think and see how projects and how communities can be impacted by these teachings. Like that's where Indigenous knowledge systems, I think, help in this transition in a big way. And there are people that see this. There are utilities that are moving in this way. And I think that's like, it's pretty cool, but also like keep that humanness in it, and not that it's just like legally you're bound to follow that path. I think that's a really cool thing that I've come across lately. But I'm gonna pass it to Aubrey.
Yeah, I like the anti-tangents that always happen with these three. There's literally never a moment that doesn't happen. But it's nice and I like it because I'm like sitting here drawing, trying not to get a headache, and I'm just laughing because I always hear these three. And it's good though. It's like really good. I think it shows like a lot of the leadership we were talking to about, like this is like a conversation on like Indigenous people's contribution to climate action, but it's also like what you can see here is like the contribution of women to this movement, and like how our women are often the ones that are like willing to say exactly what needs to be said. And I'm seeing that like more and more and more. Like I think when I first joined the climate space, it was 2019. And I was about 20 years old at the time. And then by the time I had gone to COP, I think I was like 23. And like being in the spaces and like being like a young person in those spaces, like I had no idea what I was doing. And I still don't know what I'm doing all the time. But like it's the help of like the women around me. And I was when Freddie and I got to go to New Zealand this summer, actually, we talked a lot about that, about how like if we can go look back at any point in our journey, in the climate space, there was always a woman beside us and with us, or who had given us the opportunities that meant the most to us. And I think that's like a big part when we look at the climate, in the sense of too, of how we treat our women is the way we treat our world around us too. It's the way we treat the environment, it's the way we treat the land. And when we look at it that way, it's because, you know, we look at the land and we call her Mother Earth. Like she's our mother, she's our caregiver, and what we put into the love that we have for our mother, she'll give that same care back. But the more and more we hurt her, the less she's able to take care of us, like the less she's able to give back to us. And it really is a result of, you know, how we look at, you know, women in our lives and the women in these spaces and how they uphold. And even when we talk about, you know, like water and water is life, like a lot of those teachings come from, like, you know, when you're inside of your mother and you're growing, you're surrounded by water there too. And so, like, for us, like, I think even looking at, you know, environmentalism and climate action, it comes down to, you know, the aunties in the space that are going to say stuff. It comes down to, you know, your sisters and your kin and the women, and the folks that are going to stand up and say the most oftentimes are that, and usually be the most understanding of, you know, when you're gonna have missteps. And it's that way that we like look at one another, and it's that way that we, you know, have to forgive one another, because, you know, in this space, and even in just Indigenous communities as a whole, there's, you know, still a lot of like lateral violence, and there's still a lot of people who, you know, a lot of these systems and structures, even within climate action, kind of pin people and communities against each other. Like, this community said that it's okay to build this, and this community said no, or this person spoke on this panel and said that X, Y, and Z is, you know, okay for the world, and this community is saying that that's not what they want built. And it's hard because, you know, you can't just group all Indigenous people together, and you can't just do that. And so part of disrupting the system too is recognizing each community as, you know, their own nation. Like, that's why we're called nations. Like, you don't just get to look at it as like a consultation process, you know, just like you wouldn't go into another country and build whatever you wanted to build without getting the proper agreements. You can't come on to no matter where you go on this land is Indigenous land. You have to go into it with the right mindset of understanding that everywhere is going to be different. And even growing up, on my dad's side of the family, my Cookum was from Poundmaker and my Mushum was from Little Pine, and all they're separated by is a fence line. Like, those two nations are side by side. And I would go visit my Cookum, and she would slap my hand for doing certain things, and I'd go visit my Mushum and I would do it that way, and he'd be like, no, that's the wrong way. And so it just goes to show, like, you have to go to the nations and understand, and it's going to be different, and that's okay, because that's part of the process. And you're not always going to be right, and you have to be okay misstepping. And so I know that we were talking yesterday about leaving folks with a call to action, and we were talking a lot about, you know, what that looks like, and, you know, what it means in this conversation of Indigenous leadership and climate action. And so, you know, it's hard to do this right now, but we want, like, when we're thinking about calls to action, it's easy to do a call to action, say it, and then you folks have it in your mind for, you know, X, Y, and Z amount of time. But what I really want you to do is, like, when you're thinking of calls to action, or what you're going to do when it comes to calls to action, is find ways to measure it, which isn't always an Indigenous teaching either, but find ways to measure it, just in the sense that we don't always hold ourselves accountable to the calls to action that come of us. And if you have something that can hold you accountable, or that's measurable to that, or if you can say, I am agreeing to mentor 3 Indigenous youth a year when it comes to building them up in this space, something that you can hold yourself accountable to, is what's important to us. Because we were also talking about data and how it's important to make sure that we can look back and know that these conversations, nice thumbs up. Thanks, Jordyn. It's just, so Jordyn really agrees with this point. And it's about just like, it's something that we can look back on and make sure we're, you know, doing that. And so what I was talking a little bit about, you know, and I get to work with the youth in my space. And what we really wanted to do from this is, like, a conversation like this, is that we, you know, energy projects take 5-10 years more to work on and negotiate and do what we need to do to get to the space that we often are at with these big successful projects. And what we were talking about is just really making sure that when you're in those processes, find Indigenous youth in your community, in your circle, in your space, and be willing to walk alongside them. Don't lead them, don't mentor them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying walk alongside them in the sense of show them where these tables exist that we don't always know exist. Well, try to find ways to get them into that space and give yourself a number that's feasible for you to hold yourself accountable to. You know, is that 1 a year? Do you have this capacity to have 5 youth that you speak to a year that you really try to walk alongside? Hold, you know, with your organization roundtables where it's just time to listen and know and hear what the concerns that they have without saying anything back. Hold space for Indigenous youth as much as you can and find a metric that you can measure at the end of a year to know if you met your target or not on that. And, you know, speak to places like ASI on, you know, what exactly you're doing that is innovative in that space, or feedback that Indigenous youth that have given you. Because at the end of the day, this is a team effort that all of us need to go into it. It's not Indigenous people versus non-Indigenous people. It's not community versus community or women against women. It's all of us need to be doing this work together. And how do we do that in a way that's innovative, changing, decolonized, and a way that, you know, can make our youth and our next generations proud of us. So our call to action that we really were thinking of is, you know, really lift up the youth, because if we're building these projects and these solutions and we're not including our young people, we're not building these for anybody, and we're leaving them out of an important discussion. So that's the call to action. And I'm not sure if we hand it back to over to Taylor, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, for closing out this beautiful and wonderful generative conversation that we got to listen to. What a brilliant call to action. Thank you for sharing that, and inviting us all to do more than just show up to this beautiful conversation, but actually take something from this, and do more, build those relationships and uplift youth. Thank you so much to all of you for the gift that it was to get to listen to you speak today. I so wish that I could sit here for another few hours and listen to you speak, but you all have amazing, incredible, like full days and weeks and months to go and do this work. So we'll leave you to it. And thank you to everyone who joined this conversation. Yeah, I think I just want to leave it there, but other than just to say thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, and if you want to contact us about anything, if you have any questions, please reach out to me at info@sustainableinnovation.academy. But otherwise, I wish you all well as you go about the rest of your days. I hope you take good care. And thank you again so much to Danii, Freddie, Aubrey-Anne, and Jordyn.